Hello and thanks for watching this Cloud9 ERP Solutions video and subscribing to our YouTube channel. In this video, we're going to take a customer return and we're going to follow it all the way through the workflow back into the vendor's hands. So, customer has an issue with a product they purchased from you. They need to return it. We're going to take it through that process. We're going to find the item. We're going to find how we purchased it, meaning from what vendor. And then we're going to contact the vendor, assuming that it's still under warranty with the vendor, and make all our decisions and process the entire workflow. So you can see here, we have our sales order up, and this is an RR. This is a return with replacement. We could use an other return type, but essentially what we're trying to do is return with replacement because we're trying to determine whether or not this is under warranty. So we may start this and then later determine whether or not we're going to actually issue replacement, whether the customer wants to pay for it or whether it's actually under warranty. We'll pick our customer. And then we'll click on Add Invoice. So in this process, this screen allows us to go back and look up old invoices. So we're going to ask the customer, what is your invoice number? Now you can see all the different invoice numbers. You can search right from here. And once you select one, you can see all of the items that are on that particular invoice. And you can also see the serial number. So your secondary question might be, okay, what's the serial number? Now, we don't always do things that way. The customer might not have the invoice, but they do have the serial number. So in that case, what we can do is go into inventory and bring up the inventory lot serial history. And here we can type in the serial number and make sure you give it a good date range, because if you don't go back far enough, you might not find it. But what you can see here is that this computer was purchased on August 2024 by Elevation Computers. And this is the reference number to the inventory issue. But if we scroll over to the right, we can find the original sales order. We open it up and we can see the item is sold through here. So we can take that order number and go back to our return. And instead of looking up an invoice now, we can look up this order and find that same item, check it off, and add it to our return. So we've confirmed it with the customer. Now, the other thing you could do here is, again, the customer might have just the serial number. Great. Use the inventory lot serial history. You could search for it. But if the customer doesn't have any references and you want to try and help them out, the other thing you could do is you could leave these blank and you can pick the item that the customer is referring to, that they want to return, that they're having an issue with. And you could pick the serial number, but perhaps you don't know it. If you go back and you pick a date range, maybe you only want to go back a little bit because anything too old would fall out of warranty. For our system, I'm going to go back a few years here. But when I do that, it shows the history of that item, all the different times that that item's been purchased by this customer. And you can see, because it's serialized, it'll show the serial number and the date that they purchased it, as well as the order number. So you may be able to piece this together by talking to the customer and figuring out when and where they purchased it from. So, but over here, we're doing our return. Now, Acumatica will look up the original invoice for you because we looked it up by order, and it will pull in the original unit cost, the cost that they paid for it. Now, certainly you can play with that if you want to. You can also play with the price, the credit price that you're going to give them back. It will also pull in the price that they originally paid. But since we've gotten this far, we can remove the hold. And now we can give the customer an RMA number and instructions for sending this back. Now, what you could do here is you could, for example, print this out, and you can modify the order report to say, this is your instructions for return. Be sure to do this, that, and the other thing. You can actually print a return label in Acumatica. We're not going to get into that in this video, but you can do all that.
Before I continue, only 15% of you are subscribed.
Before we
hit that subscribe button now to get notified about new videos and events.
What we want to do is make a determination with the customer, and could be something that you're doing on the phone with them at the time that they call, or this could be something that you do a few days later after you've had an opportunity to discuss it with management. If it's a very expensive item, if it's gray area, whether or not the warranty is expired. But we know what the serial number is on this. We click on line details, you'll see it in the return. It's this number right here. And what we can do is go back to our inventory lot serial history and search for that. Now, we only found the sale. You scroll over to the right, you'll notice this is a customer transaction. This is when it went out the door. Quantity -1, because we deducted 1 out of our inventory. But if we go back, we see that there's no purchase history for this particular serial number. And that's because our demo database never has this purchased. It was most likely brought in through inventory and just brought into inventory through a receipt or some sort of inventory adjustment. But if we go through inventory transaction history and we alter our dates as far back as we want to go, because we're not going to bother the vendor if it's too old. So we don't want to go back too far because the vendor is going to not take us seriously. But if we go in and we search by this item under inventory transaction history, we can scroll over to the right and see all of the different purchase receipt numbers. Now, this inventory transaction history also shows the output, the selling of them, but these are the times that it came into stock. And what I gather from this, because there's no lot serial number, is that we don't assign the serial number on the way in. We tag it with the serial number on the way out, meaning the vendor doesn't care about the serial number. That's the way we define this. If we go back to that purchase receipt, or an example of one of them, we open it up. We can see a purchase receipt with, among a couple other things, we can see the Lenovo laptop computer. And if we click on line details, once again, no lot serial number was assigned to this. It's set up on the way out. And you can confirm that if you need to by opening up the item profile. And if you scroll down, you can see the lot serial class is serial number when used, meaning when sold, as opposed to serial number when received. So these are the assignment methods where we have it on when used, which is why it's blank in our history, because at that point in time, it never got a serial number. It hasn't gotten a serial number yet. So now the question is, what do we do with this particular customer? How do we handle it? Well, we know that there's no vendor attached. So our determination from this might be, well, first of all, you bought it in August 2024. That's not too old. We're going to honor it because we have our own 1-year warranty. But let's say we decided that we also wanted to hold the vendor responsible and let them warranty the part. And if we go back and we look at what we have here, ordinarily we would search by our lot serial number and find something. But we do see a receipt for this item back in August 2024. Again, no serial number, which is why we can't find it under the inventory lot serial history. Word to the wise, if you are warranting products for your customers and you're also getting a warranty from your vendors, then you're definitely going to want to have the item set up for serialized when received. So you could put the vendor or the manufacturer's serial number on as soon as you get it into your warehouse, as opposed to dealing with it later, because otherwise this is the kind of situation you'll have. You'll lose your trail of breadcrumbs where you can't go back to the vendor because you just don't know what the serial number is. But nonetheless, we do see that we have a receipt here. We've made the determination now that because we purchased it in August 1st, and because the customer's invoice is a little bit after, that we may be able to convince the vendor that it's their responsibility. And we're going to take that up with the vendor before we confirm and send this RMA out to the customer with a possible replacement, because we haven't sold the vendor on it yet, and we want to make sure that they bought on and they're going to take this product back so we don't have to eat the cost of it. So the way to do that, if we go back to our transaction history and we look at this, we scroll over to the right, we can see the purchase receipt number. We can open it up, and then we know we bought it from McGovern Computers. We can click over here, contact the vendor using this phone number. If we go back to the purchase receipt, we can either reference the purchase order number with the vendor, say, listen, I got this purchase order 2506, and ask them again, I bought 30 of these laptop computers. I got one customer that's got a bad screen on it. The other thing we can do if the vendor doesn't know how to look up purchase order numbers is we can go to billing, and here is our vendor invoice number. Now you can't see the vendor's reference number. You can only see our reference number, but if you open it up, you can communicate with the vendor that this is the vendor reference number, which again, in our demo database, it just so happens to be the purchase order number. Not likely that that's what it is. The vendor would have given you a different invoice number. But regardless, you can communicate this now and have a conversation. Once you've determined that, let's say the vendor decides they will take it back. Well, what we can do here is, because we're already here, we can check this box and click return. So we're selecting the item we're going to return, and we can click on return. Now this will bring us up to a brand new purchase receipt, but the type is return. Now what we're going to do here is change the receipt quantity. We're only going to issue one back. Yes, this column says receipt quantity, but again, this is a purchase receipt return. So essentially we're sending one back to the vendor. So what we'll do is we'll release this and then process our labels and take care of all our paperwork to get it back to the vendor, because now the vendor said, okay, I'll take this back. And now that we've done that, if we close this and we go back to our return for the customer, we can now add a replacement item. So what we'll do is we'll put the same item in here. Notice the operation is receipt. However, when we tab over and we put the quantity in, if we put quantity 1 and we scroll back over to the left, you'll notice Acumatica automatically takes care of the issue. Within the last couple of years, Acumatica has added that functionality. You only need to worry about the positive and negative quantities, and it'll figure it out. Now you could save this, and once again, you could print or email this out, depending upon your form settings. You could print or email this out to the customer so they know that you're honoring the warranty, and essentially it's going to be no cost to them. And that is because if we scroll over, we are crediting them for the same price of what we're returning. So that's how that'll work, and it'll be a 0. Ultimately, once we get the item back from the customer, we're going to want to get that first. We'll create our receipt. We'll get that into stock. We can then complete our purchase receipt return back to the vendor. We can get that out to them. And then we're comfortable. We could ship the customer a brand new product, or we can make the customer wait for the returned product from the vendor if it's a repair. If it's simply a replacement, it all depends on your RMA policy with your customers and these items. So again, a lot of flexibility here. There's a lot of different ways these different workflows can wiggle. The goal here is to try to show you the flexibility and allow you to work a simple workflow from the customer's return and replacement to the vendor's return. Now, ultimately, what you're going to do with this purchase receipt, go back, we open up our purchase receipts. We can see our return released. Ordinarily, you wouldn't release this until you received it back from your customer. Once we receive it from the customer, we receive it into stock, and then we could send back to the vendor that very same one. Then we'd want to release this. But at this point, once we have this released, we're going to want to match this up with the vendor's credit, because either way, the vendor's going to ship a new product. They're going to give you a credit. And once again, it's going to net out to 0. So, but nonetheless, if we go into payables and we go into new bills, we'll change this to a debit adjustment. That's getting a credit back from the vendor. We'll pick our vendor here. We'll enter the credit memo number. And then we're going to add our PO receipt, which we see here. And this should be the amount that the vendor's crediting us for, because this is what we paid on the original purchase receipt. And then we could remove the hold and apply this credit to a future invoice, probably a brand new Lenovo laptop computer that the vendor's going to send out a few days later. And then lastly, once we're ready to send the replacement item out to the customer, we can create a shipment. Again, earlier we created a receipt to take back the customer's item. Now we're going to create a shipment to ship out the customer's replacement. In the end, you'll have a receipt, which will convert to a credit memo for the customer, and you'll have a shipment, which will turn into an invoice for the customer, and those two documents will net out to 0 because, again, we've decided we're not going to charge the customer anything here. The order total is 0. So that's how we look up a product that the customer's purchased from us. We determine whether or not it's under warranty. We decide whether or not we're going to issue the customer a full replacement. We determine from the vendor whether or not we're going to get a credit from them, whether we're going to do a return to them as well. And then we go through this workflow, eventually sending the customer out a replacement, making the customer happy. So hopefully you found this video useful. And if you did, please click the like button. And if you have any questions about this or anything else Acumatica, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again. Have a great day.